So good morning, everybody. We all know that there are many areas around our cities. As you can see, there's the administrative area. This is the area where the mayor has power about. There's a morphological area. If you look to the city from above, from an airplane, then you see it doesn't really end at the administrative border. Then we have the functional urban area, which is the topic of today. We have the larger economic area, which is probably an area where you can have economic links, which can be reached within 1 hour from the airport. This is the rule of developers. They consider the city until they can go within 1 hour from the airport. And then you have sometimes visionary areas, like Öresund, like the link between Oslo and Göteborg. Now here is a table which shows how much larger these areas are than the administrative city. If you look to Paris, Paris is only 2.2 million people administratively, but the morphological area is 4.4 times larger, and the functional area 5 times larger. There is no question that there is a big debate about Grand Paris, because Paris recently does not cover at all what the real area is. But the same applies to Lisbon, to Manchester, to Katowice, to Lille. So in average, in Europe, the morphological area is more than 1.5 times larger, you can see it here, than the administrative city, and the functional urban area is 2.3 times larger. This means that you have 2.3 times more people working and also connected to your city, but the mayor does not have power about them. So there are problems in metropolitan areas, and there are clear benefits if there is good metropolitan cooperation. Obviously, if you have cooperation in the functional area, then you will avoid the negative effects of competition. I know cities in Europe where small settlements outside the border are decreasing the tax just to get out the investors from the city. Obviously, if you have metropolitan cooperation, then you can integrate policies. Because if you make something in the city, it has a consequence outside. You can push out poor people if you are making policies. If you have metropolitan policy, then you can handle these issues. And obviously, the economy of scale is also important. So metropolitan cooperation would be very important. Now here is a table of what we did in Eurocities a few years ago. And you can see on the left-hand side, there are the areas, smaller than functional urban area. B is the functional urban area, and then you have the larger areas. And the columns are what kind of cooperation you have in the given city, in the given metropolitan, in the given spatial constellation. And the weakest one is 1, is only a statistical unit. You have some networking, you have single functions, usually transport, then you have multiple functions, and then you have strong strategic spatial planning of binding nature. This is what we would like to have. And you can see that part which is strong spatial planning and in functional urban area, we don't have any examples, at least among those cities which we considered in this Eurocities survey. Probably Stuttgart is the closest to that, but Stuttgart has an area which is somewhat larger than the functional urban area. So what is the reason that there are some cities which are close with multiple functions, some cities which have strong strategic planning, but they don't reach the functional urban area level, so there is a problem here. And here are the basic types of situations. For example, Brno has no organization and there is only networking going on. Vienna has some functions, but no organizations for the functional urban area. Bratislava has a delegated organization, but only networking. Then you have Manchester, where you had a delegated organization until the mayor has been elected, and some functions. The French cities, they have strong planning in delegated way, and it is Stuttgart which has elected organization and has also strong planning. So this Eurocities research had the conclusion that there are big variations in Europe, but in most cases on the functional urban area level there is only informal collaboration, or if there is strong collaboration, they do not reach the size of functional urban area. So there's a metropolitan area mismatch. And you can do two things, how to change that, and these are the two things. If you have good functions, but they don't reach the metropolitan area, then you have to go in a territorial expansion, like the French cities have this task. They have to expand their territories to cover the metropolitan area. Or if you have multiple functions, then you have to get also the strategic cooperation. Now, Barcelona metropolitan area, you all know these facts, and the question was, what can we tell to Barcelona? Because Barcelona is one of the best examples of metropolitan cooperation. So the reason that we are here is not that Barcelona is particularly suffering, that Barcelona is a worst case. There are many, many cities in Europe which are much, much worse than Barcelona. The city has a metropolitan area, it has a metropolitan council, it has a governing board, it has a lot of things what other cities would like to have. On the other hand, there are two challenges which we identified, and probably these are the reasons why we were asked to make this kind of research. There's an institutional challenge, which says that AMB does not have all the functions what such an organization should have, so the limitations of competencies. And there is also a territorial challenge, that this metropolitan area does not really cover. It is now 3.2 million people. Some people say at least 4 million, others say almost 5 million would be the real size. So for this reason, we were asked to look at 5 European metropolitan areas, 5 cases which were considered to be good examples in Europe. And I would say that there are 2 ways how metropolitan thinking is going on today in Europe. One is the institutional, and the other one is the procedural. And institutional means that you should get a metropolitan organization. And this is the solution for the metropolitan problems. And from our cases, it is Stuttgart and Greater Manchester which is following this line, and obviously also Barcelona. The other approach is that not necessarily you do need a strong metropolitan organization. You can do procedures. You can do, for example, planning, which can replace the non-existence of a metropolitan body. And this is the case of Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and Zurich. Just to show you one example, because the second approach is not so much well known, and unfortunately Zurich is not here, so this is why I have put this slide here. Zurich is a city of 400,000 people, but it is the center of almost 2 million. And there is no organization for these 2 million people. Moreover, there are 8 cantons which cover these 2 million people. So these cantons are quite strong. So it was the national government who said that these 8 cantons are the Zurich metropolitan area. They have to find that they have to create an association, and the national government pushed them to make a planning conference and establish a plan. So they don't have a metropolitan body, but they have a plan, and this plan has been accepted by the Metropolitan Conference, and now the 8 cantons are pushed by the national level to get this plan, the basic statements, accepted. So there is no metropolitan body, but there is a metropolitan cooperation. Now, if we go through some of the differences between these 5+1 cities, then we can see the size is roughly the same, ranging from 2 million to 3.2 million. There are some differences how big share this settlement is compared to an important administrative level. And here you can see that Copenhagen is 1/3 of the national population. Stuttgart is 1/4 from the population of Baden-Württemberg. Zurich is 1/5 of the national population. And Barcelona is 43% of Catalonia. These are obvious facts which have to be taken into account when we are counting about changes. The type of metropolitan organization, there is no organization in Amsterdam and Copenhagen, and in Zurich it is also just an association. So basically the first, second, and the fifth column is roughly the same situation. By Greater Manchester, Stuttgart, and Barcelona has organization. Type of representation, it is Greater Manchester, where the 10 boroughs and the directly elected mayor make the decisions. Stuttgart, where you have a directly elected metropolitan body, and Barcelona, where you have 90 councillors. Zurich case is quite interesting. They have the 8 cantons, and they have a metropolitan council where one representative of all the 8 cantons and 8 representatives selected by the 400 settlements. These 16 people make together the planning. So it's an interesting way how they set up things. Functions exercised, there is a range of functions here. It is usually transport and urban planning which comes up first if there is a meaningful cooperation. The scale of the budget, this is an interesting issue. Practically there is no budget in Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and very little budget in Zurich. You have Greater Manchester and Barcelona which have the biggest budget, but this budget really depends on the functions, and if you have a function which is on the metropolitan level like public transport, then it is increasing a lot the budget. So it is 2.2 billion in Greater Manchester, 1.7 billion in Barcelona, largely because of public transport, and Stuttgart has 350 million. So just to compare the size of the budget is not good, because you have to look at what is the essence behind. The source of income, it is very interesting that direct tax from citizens is not a usual form of income. For example, Zurich has only fees from the member municipalities, and Amsterdam and Copenhagen has no budget. And then there are the strengths and the weaknesses of metropolitan cooperation, which I will not go into the details now. You will find in the study the large table. Now, probably you are most interested in the recommendations for Barcelona. So how can we address the institutional and the territorial challenge? The institutional challenge, I will talk about 6 things: the election, the identity, the functions, cooperation with the private sector, strategic capacity, and financial tools. Direct election, this is a very interesting question. You can have direct election only for the president, and this is what Manchester did, and probably Alan will in the debate, he will explain us how it happened. So Zurich also plans to do that. So Zurich is also interesting, having a very weak metropolitan constellation, but they are thinking about a directly elected president because this would make the way forward for the metropolitan identity. If you have a directly elected president, then obviously the metropolitan visibility becomes stronger. It is also more possible to involve civic actors, etc. The next step could be the directly elected metropolitan council members. There are not too many examples in Europe. Stuttgart is one, and probably Thomas will tell us a few words about that. It is possible to have in one area directly elected council, but in other similar areas, in similar regions, in other places in Germany, you don't have it, probably in Hanover, but these are the 2 places, and the other regions, they don't. And then you have a second best case, which I would call indirect election of metropolitan politicians. When you have a local election, then you announce that who is running for the metropolitan, to be delegated into the metropolitan area. Metropolitan identity. This is a very difficult question, and we did not find really good answers in our study, to be frank. Either you have an identity or not. This is the first thing. And for example, Manchester has an identity because these 10 settlements were working together since decades, and they are really historically Manchester. But if we talk about Amsterdam, for example, no one really knows where is the border, what is the metropolitan identity of Amsterdam. It can be changing, and it is changing. The same applies to Copenhagen. You don't really know where is the end of the city. Even Stuttgart, which has a very strong metropolitan government, directly elected, the identity of people is a question whether they really feel, all the 2.5 million people, whether they feel that they belong to Stuttgart, Verband Region Stuttgart, or they feel to be a member of their own small municipality. Of course, if you have public services which cover the whole area, then it is better. And Barcelona has strong public services. If you can extend these services, for example, by new competencies in housing or social, then you could increase the metropolitan identity. Symbols are very important. And again, I am coming back to the directly elected mayor, who represents in television, in the newspapers, the whole area. Then people start maybe to feel more connected to this area. And obviously, visibility in international matters can be important, and in this regard, Barcelona is doing a lot, and quite good. How can you get more functions? This is the next question, and I think very, very important. For the moment, the metropolitan area of Barcelona has many functions, but not too much in social competencies. So social cohesion, housing could be a way to strengthen the functions of Barcelona. Manchester shows a good example, an interesting example here, where Manchester is trying to coordinate services between the national and the local level. So Greater Manchester area has some role to play in education, in health services, in social services, although the final strong bodies are the local governments. So you can look for competencies where the metropolitan area could be a better manager of a function than the Catalan government. The question is, do you have such functions? Can you do something here or not? Of course, you need financial resources if you take on any function. Cooperation with the private sector is obviously very important, and the Barcelona Metropolitan Strategic Plan is a good step into this direction. Manchester went one step further. They have the Chamber of Commerce organized also on that level, and they also have permanent processes making decisions, not only a plan, but also constant discussions and making decisions. This could also be the case in Barcelona. So why don't you have a forum on metropolitan level, for example, about housing, for example, about youth employment, bringing together different actors and trying to make decisions. Appointed deputy mayor for economic issues is, for example, very important. And this is taken important in Manchester, but also in Stuttgart. Stuttgart recognized, if I understand well, that the large companies, they are getting more and more interested in China, in other interventions. They forget a bit that their center is in Stuttgart. So the city, the Metropolitan Verband, is making special efforts to link them back into the city where the center is. Strategic thinking capacity on metropolitan level. Again, Barcelona Metropolitan Strategic Plan is a basis for that. Manchester has also boards and committees which are working on that. And what I found particularly interesting is a body of 200 people, and Alan is working for this. Alan is a university professor who, after being in university, he was invited to go to the Metropolitan Strategic Institute, and 200 people are working in this institute without having day-to-day tasks in transport, in education, etc. They are just a strategic capacity to think about how can these cities work better together. So if you have a significant number of strategic thinkers who are allowed or even urged to develop new ideas, innovative thinking, then you did something. And maybe this is not so costly. It is not a major item in expenditures on the metropolitan level, but it is a very important resource. So a substantial budget for strategic thinking. This could be financed by the core city mainly, because usually the core city is has the most money, but also you can ask the economic players to contribute to that. Stronger financial tools, obviously direct tax is what metropolitan people dream about. It's not so easy to get. You can also have some influence on the allocation of national resources, and this is interesting. Again, Manchester is trying to have some say how the health budget is allocated to the 10 cities, 10 municipalities which constitute Greater Manchester. And also the land policy is an interesting issue. If you want to have development in areas where the metropolitan interest would be important to have a development, then you have to have a fund for that. You have to have kind of special financial backing. Now, these were the major institutional issues. What can we tell about the territorial challenge? Is it really possible to expand AMB from 3.2 million to 4 or 5 million? 5 million would be 2/3 of Catalonia. So I think there are serious problems here, serious questions, whether Catalonia would like to have an association for 2/3 of its population, especially if having a directly elected mayor, then this mayor would be almost as strong as the directly elected regional leader. So we have probably to think about other solutions which can come to a similar result but not expanding the territory directly. And these are the collaboration and planning agreements and working for a national and regional framework. Now, collaboration and planning agreements, here we have very interesting examples from Amsterdam and Zurich. Amsterdam has a network governance in a flexible area where sometimes hundreds of politicians are coming together, thinking together and achieving decisions. And Zurich achieved the situation where they have a plan for an area. So these kind of seemingly weak procedures can lead to results, maybe not so strong than a body itself, metropolitan body itself, but results can come out of that. And then you can really lobby for a national and regional framework, Spanish and Catalan framework, which would really give more power to metropolitan cooperation, because it is a national issue as well and also regional. You have to ask these levels, you have to prove to them that if there is a trust in the area, not only in the first ring, but also with the second ring around Barcelona, then the outcomes will be better for Catalonia, but also for the whole of Spain. So the national framework could help a lot to strengthen procedural cooperation and to give the feeling to the settlements of the second ring that there is no danger of administrative merger. So you should cooperate with Barcelona because there is no danger that Barcelona will eat you up. Again, Zurich is an interesting example with the planning power, and Amsterdam is an interesting example with the action plan. And also Copenhagen has a framework for economic cooperation. Now I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and this is the European framework. You can see this drawing, I like it very much. Poor Europe is in the middle of terrorism, refugee crisis, debt crisis, Brexit crisis, all the crises are around. What can Europe do? What will be post-2020? We have the first draft of the cohesion policy proposal, and they are not really good conditions because Brexit, there is really a decrease in the revenues for cohesion policy. Cohesion policy should be changed dramatically, I would say. A fresh look would be needed. One way to go would be a stronger territorial dimension and less thematic priorities. This would be the stronger territorial dimension. On the left side, you have the traditional way of thinking. You have national states, provinces or regions or whatever, and administrative cities. But real life is going on in neighborhoods, in metropolitan areas, in macro regions. So you should give more power to these areas, and if they don't have a body which can make decisions because they are not directly elected, etc., then these plans should go back to the administrative units where the decisions are taken. My last two slides are coming. What could be done for a stronger metropolitan dimension? post-2020. So I think the European Metropolitan Authorities Forum, where Barcelona is one of the leading powers, says that the EU should have a metropolitan agenda. There should be a stronger territorial dimension. It will be 6% instead of 5%. Now this was the answer of the Commission. So it is stronger with 1%. I don't know whether you say that this is a really strong answer on that. EU should support the idea that metropolitan authorities and organized agglomerations are eligible to bid directly for cohesion policy. More weight should be given for integrated metropolitan development, and there should be also some financial incentives. Metropolitan areas should become real partners in the national planning for European money. And EU should develop tools and guidance to support planning on metropolitan areas. Now, I would say that these ideas are more or less gone. I did not find traces to go into this direction in the new proposal for ERDF. It is a strong thematic coordination, strong thematic objectives, not too much more for territorial, nothing about metropolitan. So it is still our task to fight for that, because there will be a debate for more than 1 year, even 2 years maybe, about how the final version will look like. But for the moment, it is not really looking that metropolitan areas will be accepted by the Commission as the future area of planning and working. Thank you very much.